Good morning and a very warm welcome to the India launch of the Powering Jobs Report 2022. The Global Access to Energy Workforce was published last week, and some of you may have joined that. And today marks the India chapter of the launch with a focus on the DRE jobs created in the country. We express our gratitude towards Skills Council for Green Jobs for co-hosting the event, and all our steering committee members, survey partners for being a part of this entire journey and for informing the report. We are humbled by the support received from our funders, Good Energies Foundation, Get Invest, and Rockefeller Foundation. Through the next 2 hours, we'll share the report findings, followed by a special address by Dr. Praveen Saxena, the CEO of Skills Council for Green Jobs. And then we have a stellar panel that will share their insights on the emerging themes and will reflect upon the report findings. But to begin with, we have a special message from Power for All CEO Christina Skierka. She couldn't be here with us today because of other engagements, but let's tune in to what she has to say about the India report and stay with us. Thank you. Taking a second to upload the video here. Yeah. Thank you, Ashwini.
Yes, it is. So Kendraji has joined.
Ashwini, may I request you to switch on the video by Christina, the video message that she has for us?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Just a second.
Sorry, Ashwini, you need to unmute
There's
yourself
no audio
because it's playing from your system. Thank you.
The detail of force that is a jobs engine for emerging economies. According to some of the estimates in the report, there's over 500,000 jobs around the world that in fact are coming from the DRE sector. And when we apply what's known as a productive use multiplier from our 2019 report, we see those numbers are even greater, up to 5 times greater. So with this report, which is generally supported by Get Invest, the Good Energies Foundation, and the Rockefeller Foundation, Power for All and all of our Powering Jobs partners here today are pleased to present this second authoritative data set after surveying hundreds of companies around the world, including in Ethiopia, India, Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda. This is absolutely the most comprehensive DRE data set in the world. But it's more than just a collection of employment statistics. The Powering Jobs Census from 2022 explores the powerful linkages between SDG 7, Sustainable Development Goal 7, which of course is focused on access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy, with SDG 8, which is actually a focus on inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. Many of the findings in this report, including resilience in the face of COVID-19, suggest there's a lot of reasons to be bullish on the powerful jobs being created by this sector. The 2022 census also provides insights that governments and donors have to act on now to ensure the human capital needed for tomorrow. And it's more than just the technical and managerial skills, which of course are incredibly important to grow the sector, but it's also tackling head on some of the structural challenges that limit the DRE sector's ability to accelerate adoption of clean technology and deliver energy access. For example, ever-changing industry regulations and environments, inequitable access to subsidy, and also cultural norms that often prohibit women from joining the workforce are just a few of the institutionalized biases that govern the pace of change that DRE can deliver. So the Powering Jobs campaign is a global effort to develop that human capital talent pipeline of tomorrow. And what we see is that in order to really deliver on the promise of decentralized renewables and the massive jobs opportunities that are there, we needs to be a sector that's adequately supported. Many of these rural jobs can be filled by women and youth. And of course, they're the ones who suffer most from energy poverty and economic disenfranchisement. So things like partnerships with universities, vocational schools, student organizations, and importantly, workforce development boards like the Green Skills Council are all tools that can and should be used by the energy sector, but increasingly more so by decentralized renewables. In order to have the workforce needed to end energy poverty, we have to engage in a coordinated global effort to develop the specific human capital pipeline that meets the needs of this rapidly growing sector. And I have to say in closing that I know of no more just transition than what it is that decentralized renewables can deliver. A greener economy, good jobs, meaningful work, and work that helps support communities and even countries in creating a more sustainable and resilient future. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the presentation of the 2022 Powering Jobs Census.
That was Christina Skierka, CEO, Power for All, and that was a special message to all of us here for the India launch. And now I'm going to hand over the session to my global colleagues in the Partnerships and Campaigns team. Suranjana Ghosh is the Director of Partnerships and Campaigns, and Anand Prabhu Patanjali to launch the report and share the findings. Also to let you know that we are live on LinkedIn, so please give us a shout out on social media within your networks. Over to you, Suranjana and Anand.
Thanks very much, Debanjana. And once again, good morning and a very warm welcome to all of you at the launch of the Powering Jobs Census 2022, the Energy Access Workforce with a focus on India. First, for those who are less familiar with Power for All, we're an international organization that focuses simply on the good of energy access. We emerged from the energy sector itself in 2015 and started to focus on getting the ecosystem to work together and growing the market for distributed renewable energy to end energy poverty. Our mission is to mobilize the network of energy access ecosystems that will help transform the way energy is currently being used, generated, and paid for. Next slide, please. So we came to do this study on powering jobs for one very clear reason. We found that the diversity of jobs was really not being understood the way it needed to be by government and development sector partners. Next slide, please. There was no data to be had in the early days of Power for All, so we decided to take the initiative to investigate a ground-up, statistically relevant approach to understand what kind of jobs are actually being created alongside the achievement of energy access for all, and to help showcase decentralized renewables employment data for its potential in helping achieve both United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 7, the access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all, and SDG 8, which is providing decent work for all, which is what Christina also just touched upon in her address to us. Moving on to the next slide. Today, we are going to be speaking about the Powering Jobs campaign, the goals, the global context, the research scope, and some of the estimates, trends, and key insights that we now see for India. We'll have a separate section for question and answers at the end of the discussion. So if you have any questions, please use the question and answer that you would see and not the chat box. Next slide, please. I'd also like to introduce you to the wonderful panel that we put together for you today. I'd like to begin with Dr. Praveen Saxena, who's the CEO for the Skills Council for Green Jobs in India. Moving on to Mr. Upendra Bhatt, who's the CEO and co-founder of C-Kinetics. Mr. Rohit Chandra, who is the CEO of OMC Power. Surabhi Rajgopal from the Selco Foundation. Sahil Khanna, who's the General Manager Asia and LATAM for Sun King. Abhishek Jain, Fellow Director and at Powering Livelihoods at the Council for Energy, Environment and Water. and Grace Perkins, Program Director for Clean Energy at Shortlist. And of course, Debanjana, who's our Country Director for India at Power for All. Next slide, please. I'd like to take a moment here to thank everyone who has helped make the Census and the Powering Jobs campaign possible over the last few months, in addition to our very generous funders, the Rockefeller Foundation, Good Energies Foundation, and Get Invest. I'd also like to thank our survey and research partners, both Clean as well as CEW in India, and AMDA, Gogla, Flask, Shortlist, Ashton, and APSIA. We couldn't have done this research without the networked approach that Power for All prides itself on in bringing together information from more than 350 companies in Africa and India, as well as inputs from our India Steering Committee, members of which were again drawn from the Clean Network, Climate Trends, Council on Energy, Environment and Water, Husk Power, Hydrogreens Agri Solutions, S4S Technologies, Selco Foundation, and the World Resources Institute in India. Next slide, please. So a bit about the context of the Powering Jobs campaign before we get into the actual launch and findings of the report for India. I think everybody in the DRE sector kind of understands that we need more companies to address energy poverty. And most of us also understand that this is really no longer a technology problem, but it's actually more of a manpower problem. A lot of the time, it's a distribution, access, and implementation issue. And our numbers back this up. We see that 4.5 million jobs can actually be created by 2030. And the goal is to have both jobs and energy access face each other. So we have the talent pipeline in place, which we also need to end energy poverty. And through the Powering Jobs campaign, we aim to build three things: awareness, advocacy, and activation. So awareness that demonstrates DRE is a jobs engine that is worth investing in by developing and disseminating credible evidence. Advocacy, which is in terms of expanding DRE training and education with increased financial, policy, and programmatic support in target institutions. And activation, which is in terms of mobilizing the ecosystem to support DRE jobs, including ease of doing business for DRE companies to drive jobs. Next slide, please. So a few high-level findings for India before I hand it over to my colleague Anand, who will unpack the research findings in more detail for us. We see that the sector itself has proven to be really resilient throughout the pandemic and created stable jobs. I think this time, the second census that we've done has been particularly crucial in understanding how the sector has been impacted in the 2 years since the pandemic, because we've done the first round in 2019, which was pre-pandemic. We also see a gap in training programs, which of course we'll talk about in more detail through the course of the session today. It's also critical to know that women actually participate more in this sector's workforce as compared to the fossil fuel industry. We still, of course, have a distance to go in terms of DRE jobs in India, and today is a great opportunity for all of us to take on board discussions of this sort to figure out a path forward that prioritizes training and development, building in gender parity in the workforce. So we're building a robust and equitable energy access workforce. Moving on to the next slide, please. So once again, just before I hand it over to Anand, we're delighted at Power for All to bring this report to you today, and I hope that all of you will find it very useful in your area of work in the decentralized renewable energy sector in India. Please download it on your mobile devices with the QR code that you see on the slide or through the link on our website. And over to Anand for findings from the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Ranjana. Before I just go through the research findings for India, let me take a few more minutes for people to click on the link or scan the QR code, or take a screenshot and download it at a later point. And this link is available in our homepage, directly on the homepage itself. You'll find the India report first and then the global report, the next link. Getting on to the India findings. As Ranjana mentioned, one of the key aspects of the 2022 report was to understand how the sector fared the pandemic. We all know the lockdown drove every one of us back to our homes and not to the offices. And similarly, the renewable energy sector as a whole had a huge decline. I mean, 42% was the larger decline in the RE sector, but DRE sector fared a little bit more better. A lot more better than the other sectors in the country. DRE sector still drives job creation while ending energy poverty. The sector was resilient. It had a slow and steady growth. Commercial, industrial, and solar home systems were the key engine of driving employment in India. The level of women's participation is in line with the overall Indian economy that encompasses the larger workforce of women's participation. The scope of the powering job census started off with 5 countries: India, Kenya, Nigeria, Uganda, and Ethiopia. Whereas India, Kenya, and Nigeria are the baseline countries because we did the survey in 2019 for India, Kenya, and Nigeria. So it gives a good comparison of how these 3 countries fared, and especially for India from 2019. We'll see what it is today in 22. Direct employment, the census shows direct employment for the period of 2019 to 2023, and the 4 technology types that were analyzed in the census were the pico solar home systems, commercial, industrial, standalone systems, and mini-grid systems. The methods of data collection were primary data collection, survey to DRE companies in India and other African countries, a sample of 350 plus responses. There were in-detail focus group discussions in each of the countries, and there were expert interviews and reviews with different countries and organizations to collate this data. Going on to the DRE sector numbers. In India, the findings is that 82,000 jobs are present in 2022. 80,000 jobs were present in 2022. This is a little bit of a decline from 2019, where we found 82,000 jobs were there in 2019. And most of these jobs, India being a mature market compared to the 5 countries that we have surveyed, most of the jobs are formal jobs. 77% of the jobs that we surveyed were formal jobs, and 23% were informal jobs. Most of these jobs were in the commercial, industrial, and solar home systems. And as you see from the graph here, India does show a significant resilience compared to the larger where there was a significant dip in terms of the jobs, where there was a decline of 42%, where far less. And to categorize India in comparison with other countries, we kind of split the countries into 3 archetypes: strong and quick recovery, a slow and steady recovery, and unstable recovery. No recovery. So India and Kenya falls in the second batch, where we say slow and steady recovery, as you see from the graph. We project by 2023, that is next year, the DRE sector is to have 89,000 jobs in India. That's close to 90,000 jobs. Nigeria fell in the first bracket of quick and strong recovery, where Uganda and Ethiopia fell in the last bucket of slow to no recovery. As said before, India is, compared to the 5 survey countries, India is the most mature market, and India is one of the oldest markets for DRE. If you all remember, we have one of the earliest ministries for renewable energy in the whole world, and the sector has been maturing for the last 20 to 30 years. And the energy access from 55% from 2001 to 99% today. There's a significant growth in energy access trends. In terms of the job market itself, it has a high share of skilled workers, and most of this market is created by large companies, that is commercial, industrial companies. And in the recent years, India has gone through a significant electrification project as well. And also in terms of market size, the medium to larger companies are the highest employers compared to small and medium ones. Next is going to training. Training is something that's very critical for employers, from large companies to small companies. The sector is divided into like skilled and unskilled workers. And if we see here, most of the companies, 55% of the surveyed companies do provide training, be it in-house or external training. Out of which, on an average, 67 hours, that's about 1.5 weeks of internal training is provided for the DRE companies, by the DRE companies, and 32 hours of external training. That's about less than a week of external training is provided by these companies. But this comes to a different aspect, where the top management and skilled workers get about 30 3 to 35% of external training, whereas the semi-skilled and unskilled get only about 25 to 20% of external training. This difference is quite stark, and this needs to be bridged by more up trainings to be put in place. And also from the surveyed companies, some of the key skills that they require was hard skills like marketing, installation, commissioning, project management skills, and soft skills like communication, time management, and interpersonal skills. And also, if you see that the disparity between the top management skilled and semi-skilled versus unskilled. The unskilled workers do receive very less internal training. And this is something that we have spoken to a lot of companies in our focus group discussions and interpersonal interviews, where we need to improve the internal training of the unskilled workers. So this bandwidth of unskilled workers can be moved to semi-skilled and skilled and go up the ladder of the corporate and the company sector as such. And companies did identify the challenges that finding last mile talent with required mobility and lack of trainers and have a standardized process. Because as you know, DRB applications are very vast, and it's not just electrical technological job, but more on the different applications and applications oriented with the new innovations coming out every day in the DC sector. More and more technical skills are required, and there needs to be a standardization of process in the last mile and rural suburban India. And next, going on to the women participation in the overall sector. India's women's participation did have a little bit of a decline. It was in 2019 survey, the women participations were 23%, while today it stands at 21%. One of the main reasons for it is the pandemic. The pandemic did have a significant impact on the women's participation in the sector. And this 21% is among the lowest in the 5 surveyed countries. But then again, this is in line with the overall Indian economy, which stands at 21%. What's most important to understand here is also the pay gap. Women earned only 80% of men throughout the workforce. And this was very high in the top management and the skilled and semi-skilled profiles. While in the unskilled, it only stood at 96%. So there was more pay gap parity, and the unskilled and semi-skilled was as top management and skilled. And this is something that needs to be addressed if you want to include more women in the workforce. And also, one of the main reasons, or many reasons that we understood of women's low participation was a lesser amount of talent pool and lesser encouragement and training for women to participate, or more incentive to women to participate into the workforce. Skilling programs targeted for women needs to be established by companies, and workplaces need to be more women friendly to encourage more women into the workforce. And also in the last couple of years, due to the pandemic and its rebound right now, we see there are a lot of women, more women entrepreneurs coming into the sector. But hopefully this will reflect in our next census next year. Conclusion of the findings. In 2021, India, the sector did employ around 80,000 people in the workforce. Commercial and industrial companies account for an increasing share of DRE workers in India. An average Indian worker receives about 1.5 weeks of internal training and less than a week of external training. The women's participation in the workforce did decline from 23% in 2019 to 21% in 2021, and only 80% of their male counterparts. The decentralized renewable sector established itself as a large and stable, resilient employer in sub-Saharan Africa and India, and while improving energy access. India still has a long way to go in terms of addressing women's parity, but the job trends and the sector itself is on a very good rebound, and it is bound to employ close to 90,000 people by 2023, and hopefully more by 2025. That's about it from the research side of things. I'll hand it over to Debanjana. Any Q&A, please ask in the Q&A chat box, and happy to answer those. And I'd like to thank on behalf of the research team. Unfortunately, they are in New York. They will not be able to directly participate in this session. Happy to take any questions, and please do download the report. The link is shared on the chat box as well. Over to you, Debanjana.
Thank you so much, Anand. Thank you, Surajna, for unpacking the entire report. It's been a long process for all of us. And again, taking this opportunity to thank the steering committee members, as well as our partners and our funders to be able to, do this report and support us throughout. Please share your Q&As in the Q&A section, and we are going to take that in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the session. Now I will turn the mic to Dr. Praveen Saxena, who is the CEO of Skills Council for Green Jobs, to deliver the keynote address. A brief introduction about Dr. Saxena. He has over 40 years of experience and has donned several hats in his illustrious career, and has held pivotal roles with the government, informing various policies and advising various national and international organizations. And also, please note that Dr. Saxena and his team has joined from the Skills Council for Green Jobs office. Over to you, Dr. Saxena, or your reflections on the report and setting us on how we amp up our last mile training.
Thank you very much, Devanjana. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. So first of all, my compliments to the entire team of Power for All. In fact, I was going through the entire report, and in fact, I would like to say that I was a part of developing this report, and not only for this second edition, but also for the first edition as well. So I fully understand about this. Thank you very much, Christina, for leading the entire thing. Also, Suranjana and Anand for giving us a complete overview of the report. The most important thing is that this is the only report in the world which covers this aspect, or the decentralized renewable energy aspects. We have n number of reports, even coming out from Skill Council for Green Jobs, IRENA, from many stakeholders, but focusing only on decentralized renewable energy is probably the only report. It's not one of the reports, but it is the only report. And it becomes extremely important for us when we look at rural and India. And this report becomes a sort of a torch bearing for us as far as our activities are concerned. Most comprehensive and slightly disappointing with the numbers, frankly speaking. We would like more numbers to be there in the decentralized renewable energy. But I want to assure all the people who are joining us from national as well as international call that India is working towards a very specific goal of not only meeting energy requirements, but also seeing that we have sustainable development at our focus. How it makes a difference in India, or rather India is different from other countries or the other developing countries, is we have utmost commitment from our leadership. Our Prime Minister himself is so committed to this cause that we are all, in fact, almost forced to carry out these activities. You'll be happy to know that from last 2 Independence Day speeches, which becomes the national speech, and which becomes a sort of a word casted in stone, he has been talking about renewable energy. He has been talking about environment. He has been talking about decentralized renewable energy. And all of you are quite aware that in COP26, in fact, we have committed that we will be moving towards a very major program. And we are the probably only country which is meeting its climate change goals. So very high level of commitment as far as country is concerned. There are dedicated ministries which are working. There is a dedicated small office in Prime Minister's office who is looking at this aspect of renewable energy and how do we look at climate change. So what I essentially wanted to say is, one is technology, which is, as mentioned in the report also, is available. Second is political commitment, which we have as a country. Third is now how do we reach to our rural masses? And there comes the role of skill council for big jobs. In fact, it becomes extremely important and responsibility of our sector skill council, which is dedicated for the manpower development, as to how do we reach the rural masses. I would like to inform that alone in the renewable energy sector, our sector skill council has done over 100,000 trainings, largely focusing on solar. And our next step now is that we pick up this report, the findings of this report, and see how do we develop our programs in rural areas. To my mind, yes, mini grids is one of the solutions. Second thing is home lighting system, which becomes extremely important, and we are trying to focus on our programs towards building rural masses around developing or assembling home lighting systems. That not only gives the jobs, creates more jobs. You have counted the number of jobs, but I am more interested to see that when you count it again, it should be double. It should not stay at 80,000 people working in decentralized renewable energy, but I would like to say at least 1.5 or 1.6, 150,000 jobs to be coming from India, contributing to a decentralized jobs in next 2 to 3 years. We have a short-term program and we have a long-term program as a country. As far as short-term is concerned, by 2022, we were supposed to achieve 200,000 kind of gigawatts. Now we are looking at 450 gigawatts coming from renewable by 2030, which itself includes all larger projects and smaller projects. The programs are big. We are talking of hydrogen. We are talking of clean hydrogen or green hydrogen. We are now talking of CNG and PNG networks in the country. Bios. So in fact, those are I can see decentralized jobs. It's not only solar, but there could be many more areas which would come as part of decentralized jobs. So I am quite sure when we have the next round of counting, these numbers would increase. Another important factor which is happening in India is that we are moving in a very big way to the manufacturing of solar products, the modules, the cells. So that itself, one can say that manufacturing is essentially coming for large size projects, but actually that's not true. Once you have large size projects, you have a lot of jobs in the decentralized manner also. In fact, that production facilities, which would be, for example, a gigawatt kind of a facility, would also have at least 10% of the modules going for rural development, because not the entire production goes for fall in a category thing. So we will have lot many push from the market for decentralized renewable energy as well. Another thing which I would like to mention as sector skill council we are pushing is rural entrepreneurship development, typically catching on solar and bio or agriculture waste. So we are talking of how agriculture waste can be collected, how agriculture waste can be utilized for our refineries, and how they can be converted into pellets and used as fuel. So that itself would be another decentralized job creation as far as renewables is concerned, apart from solar. And we are now dedicatedly working on a program where we will have home lighting systems assembly in rural areas. So it would not only be assembly, but also a distribution kind of a thing, which would go around and would create another jobs in the market. So entrepreneurship, yes, is the focus of all skilling efforts, so that not only they become the employers, but they also become the job providers So I'm quite sure this report is going to be extremely, extremely useful for us. We will read it line by line. In fact, we have read it line by line, frankly speaking, and we would implement it and try to see that when next time you do the third round of counting, this number from India would be extremely high. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining, and I'm sure we will have a very fruitful panel discussion going forward. Thank you, Devjita.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for setting the context. And it's wonderful to hear the Skills Council's upcoming focus. And as part for all and on behalf of our partners, we definitely look forward to collaborate, especially on the rural entrepreneurship development that you spoke about. And it's wonderful that, we are all here together. Again, a gentle reminder, please do shout out on our social media on LinkedIn. We are live there. Thank you so much again for joining in. So let's move on to our panel discussion. We have a wonderful panel today, and the broad themes for the panel discussion are training and youth, creating meaningful career path to attract talent and youth in the DRE sector, favorable growth environment, the role of public and private enterprises in fostering DRE adoption, job growth, and economic stimulus, and gender, what opportunity DRE sector can create in order to break gender stereotypical roles in workplaces. It's an honor to welcome the panelists here. I'm going to invite the panelists to take the spotlight. We have Surabhi Rajgopal. She's a senior program manager from Selco Foundation. Her work focuses on aspects of ecosystem building for energy access, including financing, skill development, and policy from a practitioner perspective. Thank you, Surabhi, for joining us. We have Sahil Khanna, who's the General Manager, Asia and Latin America from Sun King. Sahil leads the partnerships, retail, and pay-as-you-go verticals at the world's largest off-grid solar organization, Sun King. Thanks, Sahil. It's an honor to welcome Rohit, who's the co-founder and MD and Chief Executive Officer of OMC Power. Under his stewardship, OMC has become a leading rural utility company on a mini-grid RESCO platform that's providing green energy to all the segments in villages of India. We have fellow and director Abhishek Jain from CEW. Abhishek currently leads the council's practice on energy access, rural livelihood, sustainable food systems. He is also directing the Powering Livelihoods initiative to transform India's rural economy with clean energy solutions. Thank you, Abhishek, for joining in. We have Upendra Bhatt, who is the leading sector expert with over 25 years of experience in industry investment experience across India, Southeast Asia, and East Africa in renewable energy and resource efficiency domains. He's also the co-founder and managing director of C Kinetics. A very warm welcome to you, Upendra. And of course, we have Grace Perkins, who's the program director for clean energy at Shortlist. Shortlist is a recruiting firm that helps growing companies globally build world-class teams. Grace manages Shortlist's youth employment program that mobilizes and connects talent to impact in the distributed renewable energy sector. A very, very warm welcome to all of you here, and thank you for joining in. A very warm welcome to the participants again. Please stay tuned for our panel discussion. Starting with you, Surabhi. Surabhi, you've been a part of the process, the report process. You were also a steering committee member, and today you have seen the findings. Women participation in this sector has been low in India. So what do you think are the challenges that women are facing in this sector? There is pay gap, as Anand and Suranjana have pointed out. What proactive roles could organizations, DRE developers play in changing the narrative? And if the government also has any role to play?
So much, Debanjana, and congratulations again to the team for pulling this together and to bring this out. I think maybe I'll quickly start with kind of a success story on this front while looking at women's participation in the DRE sector. And this is an example from Karnataka, where you have Miss Nagaveni, who is a service associate, an energy service associate. She was earlier, she had just finished her 8th grade, and owing to financial issues, she had to start looking for job opportunities locally within the village in South Karnataka. And she was working as a trainer with a self-help group and then was identified by Selco to take on installation and servicing training. And as part of that effort, she kind of realized her own skills in the process and has fought through the stereotypes that you see typically, especially in rural communities, to actually make herself a brand image of servicing and installation in the local community, and to be able to do that and stand as a role model for other young women in the space. Now, she sees her role both in terms of actually being able to do the task of servicing and installation, but also in terms of being able to create awareness about the kind of DRE solutions that are available, whether it's for livelihoods or healthcare or household well-being, and make that more popular on the ground. Another example of Miss Usha, who is also who was a teacher and then took on this activity of looking at awareness marketing of decentralized solar energy solutions in South Karnataka, and then in Assam through the AIC Selco Foundation we were able to incubate Miss Shilpi Burman, who has set up her own decentralized solar energy enterprise and is working across Assam. So these are just some examples to say that there is no dearth of women with the kind of acumen and the kind of skills and aptitude that you need to be able to be part of the decentralized energy sector. So then what are the challenges that we're looking at? I think we've spoken about skilling and training, and the report also brings it out in terms of the number of external or internal trainings that a lot of these women have access to. While looking at skilling and training, what are the ways in which we can look at existing institutions, whether these are the rural development and self-employment training institutions, or whether these are existing self-help group mechanisms through state rural livelihood missions, and how do we make decentralized energy a part of that kind of training to be able to open up business opportunities for women, to also be able to increase their awareness on the kind of solutions that exist. And we think about skilling and training as this 1 month activity and then it's done, but obviously with increasing the participation of women, particularly in the last mile, we have to look at the kind of flexibility and support that they might require. And this is where opportunities where you're saying that decentralized energy solutions sale or servicing and maintenance could be part of a commission-based system rather than a full-time employment. It could be part of business diversification for the entrepreneur at the last mile. And looking at women not just in terms of specific job roles, but rather in terms of their ability as micro entrepreneurs or as entrepreneurs operating across a state and across a district. I think there is a merit in kind of looking at the existing structures, as I mentioned before, to try and incorporate more specific trainings on decentralized renewable energy, and to open up those opportunities in terms of whatever their aptitude is and whatever their appetite is for entrepreneurship or for technician training or for micro enterprise development. Are we allowing and catering for them to be able to access those? I think there is, the big question around linkages to financing that come up in terms of access to working capital for them to establish themselves as a micro entrepreneur, or in terms of end user financing for either their own enterprises or for the people that they cater to. And at this point, I think I'll also mention that, while we talk about women's participation in DRE, the report aptly takes note of women who are accessing decentralized renewable energy solutions as well for their livelihoods, which in an Indian context, it becomes very important to say green jobs is not just about jobs to provide decentralized energy, but rather jobs that are created using decentralized energy. And here you have micro entrepreneurs on the ground through the, in the aftermath of COVID. Selco Foundation ran a program called the Resilient Micro Businesses, where it was aimed at supporting small micro enterprises to establish themselves, whether it was in the food processing industry, whether it was in terms of tailoring or textiles, accessing weaving machines, spinning machines, solar powered roti rolling machines, and also strengthening their existing petty shop or their grocery store with additional decentralized energy solutions to actually be able to see a larger income. So I think making sure that the financing is available for these kind of entrepreneurs, especially in the aftermath of COVID, keeping note of the kind of costs involved and the cost of capital itself, and linking with existing schemes to be able to unlock this kind of financing for these end users. So I think I'll stop with that, and then and we can come back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Surabhi. Some very pertinent points raised by you about flexibility and support that should be rendered to the last mile. Thinking about green jobs, which our report aptly captures, the green jobs created from green energy. Thank you so much for the inspiring share, and it's been really encouraging to hear, Usha's example and examples from Assam and other parts of Karnataka. Moving on, Rohit, urbanization is happening across India, resulting in growing unskilled urban force. Can DRE companies like yours come together, train and leverage this demographic, especially the youth? We know that OMC does wonderful work in the rural and peri-urban areas. So what can we do in order to engage the youth and ensure that the young population that's entering the sector is already skilled? Over to you, Rohit.
Hi, Debanjana, and the entire team. Congratulations on the great work that you've done and release of the report today. So just to give you a little background, so we are a distributed energy company. We do rural mini grids, distributed energy. So we generate, store and distribute energy to rural India, and have currently 280 power plants operating in rural Uttar Pradesh. Now, this is an interesting topic, and let me share some of my insights and experience in this space, and the kind of opportunities and challenges that we have seen. So to start with, I think the DRE space represents, in our view, a really bright emerging sector, and it is going to be one of the kind of future frontiers for the job market. So if you look at this sector, there are kind of plants coming up in a distributed manner across the length and breadth of the country. So this sector is growing at a tremendous pace, and we believe that this sector would definitely provide the future job market as far as India and other parts of Africa are concerned. Secondly, I would say that not just provide opportunities, but also provide these opportunities in a more equitable manner. So if you look at the job market traditionally, so the cities offer opportunities for skilled people to get jobs. There is a tremendous amount of movement of people from villages and smaller towns to big cities, and I think the DRE sector is coming up across India, and more so, I would say, in rural India. So the job market will be provided, and the job market will be provided in a more equitable manner. That means probably you have good chances of getting jobs in your village, or if you are from a small town, then in a place which is very close to your hometown. So this would eliminate the need for migrating people from villages to big cities, and It is not just people in the big cities who will get these opportunities, but the opportunities will be spread in a more equitable manner across the country. So I think that is one important point. Then further on, what is it that we feel is the most challenging part of this? Now, on one side, you have millions of people who are not employed, who are skilled but not employed, unskilled, semi-skilled and not employed. On the other side, you have companies like OMC and many more who are wanting to employ skilled people or people who are partly skilled. So, there is a big kind of opportunity here and a challenge here at the same time to bring people and opportunities together. So while there is enough number of people looking for jobs, there are enough companies like ours wanting to employ these people, but we need to find a kind of structured way to bring people and opportunities together, because we find it extremely hard and struggle to actually have access to these people in a structured manner. So this is, I think, so there's huge demand, there is huge supply, but channelization of supply and demand and bringing people and opportunities together is something that I think we all need to apply our heads together to find a solution to that, so that jobs can be offered faster to the people who need them. Moving on, I would say the other challenge that we found working for the last 10 years was that there is a huge mismatch between the values, ethical standards, and cultural expectations that you will have as an organization compared to what you would normally find in the skilled or semi-skilled people. Now, there is no problem around the skill as such. So, if you end up hiring an electrician or anybody, with a specific skill, so we have seen that the problems around the specifics of the skill are not that many. Bulk of the problems reside in cultural and ethical and value integration between the people that you're hiring from the hinterland and the expectations from a corporate like ours or other corporates, I would imagine, have similar expectation. Now, that kind of mismatch has been less when it comes to hiring within the cities, but when you hire out there, in the countryside, then you find that there is quite a lot of mismatch and quite a lot of effort of the organization goes into fulfilling this and bridging this gap. Now, so that leads me to my last point, that there is also going to be a large-scale requirement of training and development to bridge this cultural gap. And these are soft skills. These are not, skills that you would, kind of look at in a more traditional manner, around the specifics of the skills that they need to perform the job. So I'm talking of these soft skills that require immense amount of focus, support, to make sure that there's good cultural integration, and so not only that they get a job, but they get a sustainable job which they can sustain for the long term. So with this, I would like to stop, Devanjana, and happy to take any follow-on questions or later perhaps as the panel discussion would evolve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rohit, for that nuanced explanation. We are going to take questions at the end of the panel. Yes, DRE is growing at a tremendous pace, and it is important to bring people and opportunities together. And how do we make it in an equitable manner is the key, as rightly pointed by you. DRE plays a pivotal role, and to stay on with the subject of skilling, I will move on to Sahil, and I'm going to ask you, Sahil, here. Skilling has been identified as a significant roadblock to the expansion for DRE, in a way that we have seen and heard more than once that there's a skilling gap. Jobs are restricted mostly at an urban space. Even if the solution is at a rural place, the urban resource is sent to provide solution to the rural space. So, for example, if there's a post-sale service or repair or maintenance, most of them are still restricted at a peri-urban area. So what roles can TVETs play, technical institutes play in bridging the gap? And if there's an example from your, from your experience that how Sun King goes about, bridging this particular gap?
Sure. Thank you, Devanjana, and firstly, congratulations for getting this amazing report out to the entire Power for All team, and I think to the entire sector. It gives us a good view of where we are standing and what we need to look at in the future. And maybe just for context, I'll give a brief introduction of what Sun King is doing, and then tie up to the requirements of the question. Sun King is right now the largest off-grid solar organization in the world. We employ more than 2,000 people across 40 odd countries. And we also have more than 10,000 direct sales agents who are working on the field as skilled entrepreneurs and providing financing and distribution services for DRE products, essentially. So now talking about training and where we stand right now, particularly in India, I want to first describe where we are right now as a sector, what the government has done so far, what institutions have done so far, and then talk about what are the future needs and how can we improve the situation. So let's talk about what the government is doing right now, or what they have done so far. I think just from the point of the DRE sector, the biggest change that has happened in the last 5 years is the electrification. Standing from 50% rural electrification in 2015, we're now sitting at more than 90% electrification across the country. Now, along with that, government has also ran several programs like, the national literacy missions, the state rural livelihood missions, there is Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. There are several educational programs. Government is also supporting schools, several education programs which are helping skilling the youth of the country. Now talking about the literacy rates, we currently stand at about 80% literacy, and most of that is in urban areas, as you said. And the DRE companies are mostly operating in rural areas, and which ends us up in a situation wherein if you want to supply in rural areas or have some skills in rural areas, they're mostly outsourced to urban centers or people who travel from urban areas to rural areas. Same is the issue when it comes to employability of women in this sector, for example. The sector is employing about 20% women right now, which significantly needs to improve. And I'm echoing from our experience in countries like Kenya and Nigeria, where we're employing about 50% women workforce. The situation stands completely different in India. Now, where is the sector right now? Where is the employment going? As we can see from the report, a lot of employment is moving from the DRE sector to commercial and industrial sector. If we see from 2 years before to right now there's a 50-50% split. Now the requirement of skilling in the DRE sector is important. However, as you move to commercial and industrial industry, the requirement of skilling is even more important, because then you're talking about complicated installation, complicated after-sales services. It gets more and more complicated. And obviously, as you also saw in the report, the amount of units that will be deployed in the market will be coming down. So you might even see the decrease in the total amount of workforce that is overall involved in the system. Now, whatever the government is doing right now, they may as well continue doing it. It is having an impact at certain levels. However, we all know that we cannot employ everyone in the country. I'm talking as an organization which is trying to employ as many people as possible and have them contribute to the development of the sector. This is the age of entrepreneurs. The government has to focus on creating more and more entrepreneurs in the country, obviously tied up with the soft skills that are required to be, culturally integrated to the country, to any company, for example. And once we create more entrepreneurs, once we start training these entrepreneurs, it gives organizations a higher capacity to involve more and more workforce. And I'll give you a clear example from Sun King. Even though we employ 2,000 odd people, we have more than 10,000 agents in the field. This is how we're able to create more and more impact. And whereas a lot of these people that we picked up from the field who are working as entrepreneurs have not even completed their full education. So there is a huge role that organizations can play in identifying the skill gaps and training and onboarding them in the right way so that they have a good start. as much as we need to rely on governments to provide a skilled workforce, to rely on partnerships with various institutions who can give us access to skilled labor, I think it is equally important for organizations to have a robust training program in which they can actually employ absolutely anyone, have them go through a rigorous training procedure, and then deploy them into the field so that everyone can be employed, everyone can be productive. And the major advantage as an organization for hiring entrepreneurs and getting them on board is that as an organization, you don't need to incur more and more fixed costs. Most of these entrepreneurs work on variable pay, which means that the more you sell, the more you earn. The more you fix, the more you earn. So there is no liability on the organization to keep paying for these resources over a period of time if there is no productivity. And inevitably, you employ more and more skilled workforce, people who can do a good job for you. And I think if the entire sector is coming together and working closely with the government, and I'll give you good examples. Like, for example, we had a partnership with the UP State Rural Livelihood Mission, UPSRLM. They have a program in Uttar Pradesh. It's called Prerna Ojas. Now, Prerna Ojas is employing ASHA workers across the state of UP who were initially health workers, but now are also distributing solar. These ASHA workers are now funded by the government. They're also trained by the government. They're then also trained by these private companies. They're trained by Prerna Ojas, which is then helping institutes like us to tie up directly with them, get access to like 10,000 entrepreneurs in different parts, and give them access to more employment, give them more access to training, give them more access to skills. So overall, this has to be a joint effort. I think we are in the right place at the right time. Electrification is not helping the DRE sector. In fact, it's helping the country at large. And that's why I foresee a lot of DRE companies transitioning out to different sectors. We've seen companies shutting down during COVID. We've seen companies actually moving to completely different product lines. We've seen companies now transitioning to commercial and industrial equipments. Now, as far as that starts happening and the sector keeps changing, and it will, with time, you'll see DRE employment coming down and down because the country is getting more and more electrified. And now the aim of the government is actually to increase the access of renewable energy to people who already have access to electricity, because most people actually have access to electricity right now. With this, skilling needs will increase. More complicated and sophisticated renewable energy products are going to be deployed in the field. And the one way to increase employment in the sector is entrepreneurship. That's worked for us so far. I'm going to stop there. Those are my 2 words on how we can improve employability training in the sector. It has to be a joint effort. And looking forward to taking this forward.
Thank you so much, Sahil. Thank you so much for sharing the robust training programs as a need, the way that it is the age of entrepreneurs, the need for soft skills, and sharing the share about UPSRLM and the Prerna Ojas. You have already touched a bit about the role government can play in order to create this environment, especially for CNI. And Abhishek, CEW has played a crucial role in policy and influencing in India. We wanted to learn from you that MNRE came up with a policy document on DRE. However, we have seen that the convergence of departments has left a lot to be asked for. It's not ideal. What are the policy gaps that you perceive in the sector that is hampering the growth of DRE, especially in terms of livelihoods applications?
Thank you, Debanjana. I must add, or rather echo my congratulations to you as well as the entire Power for All team for the report. I must say that doing something one-off is easy, but doing something consistently is much more difficult. So you guys have managed to do it at least now 2 times over, and I hope this continues going forward as well in terms of counting the jobs in the sector. I do want to touch on the numbers that were presented before I actually answer your question, Debanjana. I mean, we looked at about 80,000 jobs coming from the DRE space. I want to contextualize that number a little bit for all of us that if you look at the entire large-scale utility renewables in the country, be it large-scale wind or be it large-scale solar, we have about 70,000 odd jobs as of last year. So DRE, despite its small number, is actually generating more jobs than the entire 115 gigawatt of solar and wind installation in the country. And I think that is important to keep in mind, because in a country where you're adding 1 million employable youth every year into your workforce, you need to generate jobs at that pace. 1 million jobs need to be generated every year in this country. And DRE does provide that significant opportunity to create many more jobs per megawatt, per kilowatt, per gigawatt. And I think that is something which we should keep in mind. The second aspect, since I'm on numbers, is that while DRE has a lot of potential, the even bigger potential is where you use DRE for enabling livelihoods, what Surbi was talking about, the green jobs narrative or the green livelihoods narrative. CW estimates suggest that while the renewable sector in the country, by 2030, if we achieve our 500 gigawatt target, we would generate about 3.5 million jobs. And majority of those jobs actually would be in the rooftop solar, which is a form of DRE. But if you actually look at DRE for livelihoods, that can generate about 25 million livelihoods, or at least augment some of the livelihoods out there. So that's the kind of phenomenal multiplier potential that DRE livelihoods have. And now coming back to the question that you asked, which was around DRE livelihood, because the policy framework that came out in February this year from MNRE is the first such policy framework anywhere in the world, which is dedicatedly focusing on promoting decentralized renewable energy for livelihood applications. The intent is quite clearly laid out by the Government of India. And among other things, which that policy framework focuses on, there is one focus which is on the aspect that you touched upon, which is the convergence with other ministries. That policy framework has already identified what are the schemes and programs that other ministries are running, be it Ministry of Textile, be it National Rural Livelihood Mission, be it the Ministry of Food Processing Industry, all the other industries, other ministries which are trying to promote livelihoods in their own ways and forms. And how do we enable and bring a convergence while working with those ministries? MNRE understands that they are a technical ministry. Their technical competency is with regards to the clean energy component of it. But when it comes to livelihood, you need an ecosystem of support around these micro entrepreneurs, be it skilling, be it end user financing, be it market linkages. And that's where some of these other ministries and departments become very important. And that's where the convergence with them becomes very, very pertinent. So one of the things that the ministry is trying to do is create what they call an interministerial coordination committee. In fact, the first meeting of that committee already happened in the preceding months, where they had now brought in representatives from several other ministries who are focusing on livelihoods and rural development at large, and trying to ensure that the DRE focus comes in through in their programs and their schemes, so that DRE does not become a goal in itself, but is becoming an enabler to further the goals of these other ministries, be it enabling many more food processing micro industries on the ground, be it enabling many more loom operators to reduce their drudgery from moving from hand looms to solar looms, etc. So positioning DRE in a way that it can further and enhance the goals of the other departments and ministries is enabling that convergence, and the baby steps toward that has already started happening. But of course, there is a lot more to be done, especially at the state level, at the subnational level. While at the national level, this convergence can be enabled, we need to ensure that the implementation agencies at the state level, be it the state nodal agencies for renewable energy, or be it the state rural livelihood missions, and other such departments, be it horticulture, be it agriculture department, etc., they need to come together. And that is not easy in the Indian context when you have pretty significant silos among the bureaucracy at different levels. So creating implementation structures where the state leads or the state implementation leads can be those who are far more familiar with the livelihood side of the story, something like a state rural livelihood mission. And they then bringing in DRE into their fold. The example that Sahil gave around Prerna Ojas at UPSRLM. There is a similar company that has been now created with Jivika, which is the largest state rural livelihood mission in India. That company is called JWire. Again, a completely woman-owned, woman SHG-owned company, which is trying to mainstream various kinds of DRE solutions, from assembling and manufacturing LED bulbs, inverter bulbs, small controllers, etc., to doing the after-sales service, and then slowly moving towards the DRE livelihoods. In fact, CW has recently inked two MOUs, one with UPSRLM and one with Jivika in Bihar, in order to work with these respective women-led organizations to mainstream DRE livelihood through their network and through their reach. Yeah, so that's what I would say needs to happen a lot more subnational focus while we enable the convergence both at the national and the subnational level. Yeah, thank you, Debanjana.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. Of course, a lot more breaking of silos need to happen. Very well-defined silos are currently there, and we need to break those. And there has been some movement towards it, but it needs to be a collaborative, concerted approach to create these, linkages and break these silos. Thank you, Abhishek, for the extremely important insights on how we can all get together and how, at the subnational level, action can be taken. Moving on, Upendra, you have advised DRE framework, worked with DRE developers, governments alike. How dearth of skilling and training results in DRE labor shortage and poor quality, say, installations or services, and how can there be an effort to address this? What should be the focus in order to address this particular issue of, say, poor quality installation or services? And with that, over to you, Petra.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Pao, for all for putting together this panel. Echoing the comments of my fellow panelists, I think it's a good, I would say, initiative from Pao for all to kind of keep track of how the sector employment is progressing, because at the end of the day, that's what makes the numbers relevant, or makes it relevant for all of us as to what is the impact we are creating on ground. Before I kind of respond to your question, Debanjana, because I would like to slice and dice it into 2-3 components and also reflect on in context of our work. One is that, when we are talking of employment or a worker pool, etc., it really is a function of where the demand markets are. And historically, if you look at it, there is 30 to 70% of workforce from rural India keeps on migrating to peri-urban and urban India, not even when they're in the workforce, much before that, either due to educational reasons or because, somebody from their family is already in that area and feels more comfortable of bringing in the child there and slowly integrating them into avenues available there. So the problem for the DRE companies actually starts in creating a reverse migration effect if you really want to get good talent pool, and I think Rohit, Sahil, even Abhishek and Subi perhaps would echo that. A lot of the reasons people find talent in peri-urban or urban areas and then motivate them to go back to kind of be the first anchor, and then slowly you can kind of coalesce around that. So I think one is this aspect of where is the demand, both for the labor, but overall for the DRE sector. And you have kind of broad-based DRE, and rightly so, in including C&I installations, etc. Because I think so far, at least within the policy landscape, I have seen this limited, narrow thing about access being different than C&I being different than, DRE as a whole is a spectrum of solutions. Some of them are product-oriented, some of them are project-oriented, which also has a bearing on the nature of workforce that you require and can sustain. So more often than not, and this is something I would make a suggestion, is when you're looking at jobs, look at it in context of job years. Because project industries thrive with a metric called job years, which is probably a closer metric, because that helps you harmonize or equalize across permanent workforce, semi-permanent workforce, contract-based workforce. So I think for Kusum as an example, I remember MNRE had come up with a 7 lakh number or an 8 lakh job year number when they had first come out as an example. And similarly, I think it's a 24, 25 job year metric per megawatt, what they used to say at one point. But coming to the more substantive point, Debanjana, I think we do not necessarily have standards on the installation and commissioning. And I'm not just talking on solutions which have been installed on the energy access side. This is, in fact, been a bane and an issue which has been raised in several multilateral and bilateral programs as well, with the ministry and otherwise. Of coming up, we have a lot of specs on the products, but on the installation itself, we do not have a very systematic, particularly if I look at rooftops, where you can say, okay, and that is why when you go out, whether in the hinterland or even in urban areas, you will see the quality of installations vary. And even on some basic things around orientation of the panels, etc., there is a lack of a significant mismatch. So I think the starting point on this is how do you get standards going, and then getting the standards harmonized across all the implementation agencies in the country. It's easier said than done. By that time you kind of have it in the tender, but having their own workforce or their own officials absorb it and apply it, and then create a similar sensitization in the private sector through the channel and through the trade as to what is needed to make sure that the product, that this DRE product that you're installing, whether for creating electricity for a micro entrepreneur or being used as a solar pump, etc., requires that level of rigor. Because otherwise, the promise that you give in terms of the benefit, in terms of years of performance, etc., will get belied. And we are in this first phase where DRE is now slowly, because the main RE is now acceptable. So DRE is seen as an opportunity of growth, and it rightly is. But it can as well create a mistrust if the products don't perform, and it will not be the technology issue. It will be more of an installation and a commissioning gap that comes in. And you already see that in several states when you see new product introductions, etc. So that's one. I think the other aspect of this is, we have heard when Dr. Saxena was talking about, I think the Skills Council having done 100,000 trainings and so clearly, the number of people you have touched versus the number of people you have absorbed in the workforce, there's a big delta. So there is obviously a large number of people that have been touched through various programs, whether with Skills Council or even under Surya Mitra in the different states. And in fact, Kerala had a very wonderful training program. In fact, one of the finest that I have seen, both in terms of the theory, but also in the manner in which they were implementing it. And there have been partnerships with corporates like Schneider and others that some companies have attempted, who have a very structured training program. The problem, I think, is how do you create a sustained opportunity for the workforce? So once they learn, and you're not sure whether the market or that company is growing in that geography, you are naturally creating a trigger for migration. And therefore, once that starts, every 2 to 4 years, the company kind of needs to reinventing. It's no different than what urban India faces, except that, let's say in large sectors like IT, etc., they've solved it by having tie-ups with engineering colleges and having a very rigorous internal training program. That's what Sai was talking about, if I got it right, and every organization having their own toolkit for this. But I think DRE is still not at a size and scale to create that kind of attraction yet. So there is obviously a more structured intervention needed. You have obviously vocational training programs run by several institutions like Don Bosco and others who have been doing a phenomenal job. So one could think of it, it could be a program that Clean could anchor and maybe start or enable with support from its members in trying to create a geographic-based alignment around the workforces. The part of the problem will be the compensation levels will vary across companies, etc. But that so be it. It's no different than campus placements in some way. And you may need to apply it differently, given that not everybody is looking to be an employee. As Surabhi rightly said, there's a whole spectrum of micro entrepreneurs. So the inputs required for them and integrating them into the DRE solutions requires a very different thing. And I do not think they are necessarily the people to be trained for installation and commissioning, but they are the ones who represent how the demand will get manifested and scaled up. Because if the first few installations don't go well, unlikely you will see a replication effect in a short period. I think so. That is the second point. I think the third one is that the compensation overall, if you look at it, while our survey shows us doing better than other sectors, I think we need to necessarily put it in context of the aspirations of the people and whether you can retain a semi-skilled person in rural settings. In the government settings, you would normally give hardship allowances to people to go back and motivate them to. And I think we need to, as an industry, and this is where demand becomes critical, in my view, is how do you ensure that these organizations which are working, whether it is corporates like OMC or Sun King or others, how do they become the trendsetters in creating not just an equitable opportunity, but a compensation level which is not defined by the current compensation level, but kind of also factors in of forward aspiration, because that's the only way to retain this workforce in that market, in my view, in the long term. Otherwise, you every 3 to 5 years have these people continuously migrating as they get to the minimum level of skills that can get them to a good job in peri-urban India. And maybe the disposable incomes goes down when they go to peri-urban, frankly. But it is just the quality of life, and because we have promoted urbanization as the way for enhancing your skills, you go there. The last bit on installation and commissioning and linkage to government policies, I think is, I do not think we still, while Abhishek is right, this is the first framework for creating DRE as a enabling a kind of a technology for employment and livelihoods, etc. I do not think we have taken an overarching view, even on the energy sector, of what the role of DRE should be. And I think unless that is done, in my view, a lot of this will remain theoretical. And entrepreneurs will find their way out, will build it out, no doubt. I mean, mini grids were seen as a tough nut to crack. We have now multiple companies in the country which have kind of gone ahead and done it, survived, done well, despite electrification being rampant, because there is obviously a need on the ground. But if you want capital to flow, if you want talent to stay and see their future in this, I think it is extremely critical we have a formidable policy construct with a clear market direction on what is the long-term role and how does DRE get integrated beyond rooftop solar. If you're saying if it is rooftop solar, and so be it, and that is how the sector should look at it, enterprises and people will evolve. So I think that clarity is necessary. Otherwise, we keep on dabbling as innovators, but not necessarily scaling up. So let me stop with that, Dipanjana.
Thank you so much, Upendra. I think, you've touched upon excellent points, especially about the formidable policy construct that we need to all, work and look forward to. And thank you for touching upon the points of, rural India keeps on migrating, and migration is a constant. How do we work around it? How do we make skilling possible and jobs possible, and ensure that all this migration is all skilled, upskilled, is definitely important. And the role industry bodies like Clean can play in, having geographical alignments to the skilling programs and initiatives, and getting the DRE companies also together so that it becomes more constructive, it becomes more overarching rather than happening at an entrepreneurial level, at DRE companies level. Shifting gears, moving from one geographical location to the other, calling you upon Grace. Grace has joined in from Africa today, and we want to hear from you, Grace, that how has the DRE sector been an enabler in job creation across Africa, and what are the hiring needs that you see, the greatest hiring needs that you see emerging from the DRE companies? Over to you, Grace.
Great, thanks so much, Devanjana, and thank you so much to Power for All for putting this conversation together. Congratulations on the report itself, but also on the successful launch, all the events that you guys are having across the world to bring us together for these important conversations. Just to introduce Shortlist and myself a little bit, like Devanjana said, I'm the program director for clean energy at Shortlist. Shortlist is a recruiting company based actually both in India and in Kenya, but we work across the world, as mentioned before, to connect people to jobs. And so we have two sides of our business. One side is on the executive search side, so putting C-suite level executives, senior directors into impact-focused organizations. But the work that I focus on and is more relevant today is on what we call talent drives, or large-scale youth employment programs. So in Africa, we work actually with partners like Sun King and other mini-grid developers, solar home system companies, clean cooking companies, to help connect talent to their organizations to help them grow and continue to thrive. Sometimes it's nice to go last on a panel because I've gotten to kind of collect all the things from what other people have said that are relevant to our work in Africa. Thank you guys for inviting me and having me here today to kind of share what's different and what's the same. I think a lot of things are very similar. I think Sarabi mentioned the need for women to have role models, especially in technical jobs in rural areas. We find that's the same. Rohit mentioned, I think, some points that are really great and important talking points for all of us in the DRE sector around that the DRE sector continues to make the job market more equitable by increasing employment in both the urban and rural areas. And we see that as well with our companies that we work with in Africa. And I think that Sahil mentioned from Sun King, I think the differences that you get in the types of workers from rural areas and urban areas continues to be a challenge, especially continuing in Africa as well. But I think there are ways that companies like Sun King, like you said, being able to kind of hire anyone and get them up and running in your companies. I think continuing on similar things, I think another hugely important talking point for the sector, which we continue to use when we engage with funders like donor governments and other private foundations. I loved, Abhishek, what you said about DRE creating more jobs per kilowatt hour or per kilowatt than utility scale generation. I think that's super important. And then finally, Pendra, I was nodding my head as you were saying the types of jobs and talent needed for product versus project-based solutions. I think these are all kind of, if we hone in on these points, it makes the conversation richer about what are exactly the types of jobs needed, which is the Power for All report does a really great job in starting that conversation. So yeah, just, one specific thing about what we're doing right now at Shortlist, we are working also with the Rockefeller Foundation's new entity, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. We're putting, with their support, we're working to put 750 women into clean energy jobs in 6 countries in Africa by the end of 2023. And I think, it's something just to mention because I think we're seeing both the need for helping women advance their careers in the sector, as well as really figuring out what is that divide in skills needed in both the rural and urban areas. But moving more now towards the report, I think I just wanted to start by highlighting a few things from the census about the African labor market that jumped out at me. I know at the beginning, Christina mentioned there are 500,000 direct DRE jobs globally, and of those, about 374,000 are in Africa. And I think 2 things that really struck me was that, in fact, in Kenya, there are now significantly more jobs in the DRE sector than there are with Kenya's national electric utility. Additionally, in Nigeria, DRE jobs are almost at parity with the oil and gas industry, which is impressive as has been for such a long time one of Nigeria's biggest industries. So then thinking about all 4 of the African focus countries from the report, of course, Pico solar home system companies employ the largest number of people, but as we've discussed, the same as in India, C&I and mini grid jobs are expected to increase as demand for larger systems increases. Some markets in Africa are, of course, maturing faster than others, and the number of jobs may eventually grow more slowly over time. However, the total number of jobs available in Africa will continue to grow as DRE companies continue to expand into markets where the sector is more nascent. So there's huge opportunities for growth and continued expansion of jobs in Africa. So we see this frequently happening with our employer partners. Companies who we've worked with previously in Kenya or Uganda or Nigeria are increasing their staff, their headcounts in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Cameroon, and other countries. It would also be interesting to see whether in these new countries, whether a few large companies eventually comprise the majority of the DRE sector, which a trend that I know exists in India, but also we have seen in Kenya and Nigeria. So when we think about the kind of types of jobs that are available in the DRE sector in Africa, Shortlist contributed data from one of our flagship youth employment programs, which was called the Off-Grid Talent Initiative, or OGTI. OGTI was implemented from 2019 to 2021 with support from the UK government, and Shortlist placed more than 400 young people with about 0 to 2 years of work experience, so really early university leavers, in jobs with 36 clean energy companies across 9 countries in Africa. So Shortlist provided free recruiting services to help DRE companies I know someone mentioned earlier, I think Rohit mentioned just the need to be able to find a structured way to put more people into more jobs more quickly, and OGTI was meant to be an intervention to solve that. So we provided free recruiting services to help DRE companies find these entry-level candidates. And then we also implemented 12-month stipend payments as time-bound partial wage subsidies to incentivize hiring of young people and then de-risk the hiring of recent graduates. So then this allowed employers really to be more flexible with their hiring requirements, and also gave young people that 12-month runway to learn on the job and grow into their roles. So with Power for All, we provided some data, and then Power for All analyzed some job and salary data from the OGTI program. And the most in-demand job role types by companies were in customer service, operations, and sales, which made up approximately 50% of entry-level roles requested. Other common entry-level positions, which we continue to see in high demand in our current programs, are in marketing, data analytics, and HR. Interestingly, average salaries for these roles range from less than $250 per month for HR positions to slightly less than $1,000 per month for software engineers, although software engineering jobs still continue to make up a very small percentage of at least entry-level jobs in the DRE sector. So as we continue to implement the Women for Green Jobs program that I mentioned before, we see similar hiring needs. The solar home system, Pico Solar, clean cooking companies, and other distributors need large sales teams and continue to test these commission-only versus salaried compensation structures. But of course, you also need sales managers to oversee and guide sales agents, and customer service roles continue to grow as well as companies experiment with telesales jobs and remote call center representatives. So because the hiring needs in the DR sector continue to grow in Africa, we're working on new ways to raise awareness of the sector, access diverse pools of talent through sourcing partnerships, and building databases of qualified job seekers that will accelerate hiring. Just want to say thanks so much for having me here today. Happy to answer any questions during Q&A.
Thank you so much, Grace. Wonderful numbers shown by you. You have said that there are 750 women in clean energy in Africa, who have already been placed by shortlist. Phenomenal numbers. Staying on to you, Grace, for a little more time before I again go back to the other panelists. What are the skilling gaps that you often witness at an entry-level recruitment position? Like, what are the gaps that you see that the company asks you, like, we want this customized professional, but the professional might not be able to meet that expectation. So what are those gaps, and how much of on-the-job skilling happens?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And I just wanted to say our goal is 750 women by the end of 2023. So we've done about 60 so far, which is great. So a long way to go. But yeah, we're working with companies in these 6 countries to get the numbers up, and we'll keep you guys posted. Yeah, so when we think about skill gaps, and we focus a lot on entry-level roles, so we can speak mostly there. I think we hear a lot about training needs, although we keep finding numerous times again and again that on-the-job work experience provides the best form of training outside of course certification programs for technical roles, things like that. So just maybe a couple examples very quickly. We polled these young professionals who were placed under OGTI about the areas that they felt they'd need the most support from their manager. The majority of these entry-level professionals said that they needed technical training. They were afraid that their theoretical knowledge wouldn't translate directly to the knowledge that they'd need to excel on the job. But interestingly, we found pretty much more than 80% of line managers polled at the end of the OGTI program rated their new hires' technical skills as, quote, ready to hit the ground running, which I really think demonstrates that a lot of skills can be learned on the job. And so I think, but for the most part, I think we've mentioned it before in this webinar already, employers overwhelmingly reported verbal, written communication, as well as interpersonal skills as the largest areas of growth. Other areas included time management, prioritization, and multitasking. So we believe that employers, really are able to provide this training on the job, but shortlist as well as also thinking about interventions to help accelerate junior professional soft skills and on-the-job performance.
Thank you so much, Grace. That's fantastic. We do have a few questions in the Q&A, and many of our panelists, thank you, Sahil, Abhishek, for responding to these questions, Anand and Ashwini. Before we go to the next round, where I have a common question for all of you, would I request Upendra, if you can come in and if you can share, there is a question raised by Prashanta over here about, unskilled trained youth find it difficult to get DRE jobs. We assume the demand for DRE is more in rural and grassroots area. Would you be comfortable to respond to something like that? Is it true that, is this perception correct, that DRE jobs are more in need in the grassroots area? And maybe Sahil and Rohit could also comment on this after you're done.
Well, I think this partly goes into what I was highlighting, that it depends on how we end up defining the sector. For a long time, the policymakers saw DRE, and rooftop C&I as a very separate segments or subsegments. And DRE, even till very recently, they would say as access, and and they would kind of have that. So it really depends on how we define the segment. It is true that historically, when we have been looking at access, these have been rural jobs because primarily, but they're also, it's not that these rural areas are necessarily very remote. And there are, I think, in the periphery of these areas, ongoing training programs, etc., that could be tapped into. There are vocational programs because you have electricians, you have plumbers, you have other people who get trained in, and they can be tapped into. So it's not that these are bereft of linkages. Question is that, can the linkages be directed towards specific end users? And can you customize those packages so that the entrepreneurs or the enterprises which are promoting, so if Sahil is looking at distribution as the core need and Rohit is looking at installation as a core need, both those get, kind of reasonably amplified when these linkages are getting set up, and you can kind of provide for that. So yes, today when you are saying unskilled people and you kind of expect them to come and help you, and you kind of do a short, on the job training, depending on the resources, ability to ramp up, some will do good and some will not do good. It's no different than any other sector in my view. So the question would be, in addition to your own structured orientation, training, etc., can you have more modular programs which factor in, which is why I made that suggestion around clean perhaps as the industry platform, synthesizing these needs at a geography level so that you can have this conversation in context of the opportunity as well, not just in terms of potential, but the current opportunity, and take it forward. That would be my thinking. But keen to hear if others on the panel had a thought.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Upendra, for sharing that. Sahil, if I can, request you to also, because this question has a lot of, it has its roots also in the jobs and how DRE sector corporates can create the jobs. Apart from answering this question, could you also share, what are the needs that you find that are there, which federal and state governments can bridge in order to provide jobs at a local level?
Sure. So I think firstly on the question, yes, there is a need of more DRE appliances at rural areas. And yes, there are a lot of situations wherein people from those localities may not be hired, and there are people who are living in urban centers who travel 200 kilometers to reach a place and then sort of help us with distribution, installation, or whatever is required in those areas. And I guess the problem for organizations is in the volume of business that they're getting from these areas. And as I said, if you're putting in fixed cost in an area, you need to make sure that that fixed cost is getting you enough revenues to sort of cover for those areas. And generally, how distribution for us works is in a hub and spoke model. There are semi-urban hubs which cater to rural spokes, and these spokes are essentially not extremely populated, however have high needs of DRE products. And again, which brings me to the point that in a lot of situations, organizations are unable to create employment in these areas, and it's not just a factor of skill. I feel that especially in the kind of DRE distribution that we are doing, we don't need highly skilled people. A lot of people who are influential in certain villages can be trained on the job. And in fact, locals have a higher influence on the local population than someone coming from outside and trying to sell something or try to fix something. Now we understand that this is a need, and we also understand that as an organization who's operating at a scale, we have a responsibility towards the Indian rural areas to sort of create employment opportunities here. So we are, as we speak, we are working on several innovative models. One I can say is D2C, which we call direct to consumer, in which we are actually leveraging on our past experience of working with microfinance companies. And essentially how MFIs really work is that in every village they will have centers. Every center has a center leader. The center leader is essentially working with the center to make sure the money is collected. And essentially the center leader is the most influential person in the village. Now what we're trying to do with this program is to actually give employment opportunities to these center leaders. One, they're women. Two, they're highly influential. Three, they're trained to deal with financing, with cash disbursements, collections, and if they work as agents for organizations like us, there's a lot of influence that they could bring on the table. Now, as we are piloting this, we're seeing a lot of success, and I think the major drawback of this model right now is the funding that these groups would essentially have. Now, our thought process in this model was that because these women are getting money from microfinance companies, now this money could be used to create entrepreneurial opportunities for the group itself, right? Now, what really happens here is that money that these women would get for let's say income generation would be utilized in their husband's shops, would be utilized in buying their household equipment or something like that, but not reinvesting that money to actually buy product at X amount and sell it at X plus 20%, 30%. So as to create more marginal opportunities for them. We saw this working especially well with, for example, the UPSRLM pilot that we were talking about, because their government was funding these entrepreneurs. And the use of these funds was to actually reinvest and use it for income generation and business purposes, which again brings me back to the question that you were asking, that what can federal governments do? What can state governments actually do to help us increase these employments? And I think access to debt, access to low amounts of or low interest rate debts to rural centers, to women who are actually working, for example, with microfinance institutions or are working in SHGs, would actually help us create more employment. It all comes about access to funds, because people are everywhere. Like there is no dearth of population and skill in the country. I think even a lot of skilled labor force in the country is not getting employment opportunities. So how do we fill that first? How do we fill that? By creating more entrepreneurs who don't have access to funds, because private organizations and social enterprises also have limitations when it comes to the cash outflow that can really happen through their businesses, and the amount of credit that they can give in. And that's where I think public-private cooperation, partnership is extremely important to create this ecosystem. Wherein money flows into rural areas, this money can be utilized for business activities, and people can pay this money back to the government in due course of time and at low rates of interest. So while there are structured programs which are already doing this, I still feel that the access of these funds is not very easy, or is not very prevalent in all the villages, for example, in India. Yes, there are panchayats in villages, panchayats have their own budgets, but none of it is utilized for employment generation activities. It's mostly utilized for repairing local stuff or for local authorities to do some developmental work, but not for entrepreneurial activities. I guess the one thing I would like to see in the future is more of these groups coming out in villages and rural areas, people having more liquid funds to sort of invest, work as entrepreneurs and sort of earn money over a period of time on those investments, and having to get debt from government at low rates of interest.
Thank you so much, Sahil, for sharing that. It really puts a lot of things into perspective and definitely, outlines the requirements that are there and the already potential that needs to be tapped. Rohit, again, from a very private sector perspective, what are your thoughts on, the rural jobs and urban jobs that are being created? And also if there is one thing I would say as a wish list for you that you expect from the federal and the state governments?
Yeah, so I think that Debanjana, my kind of views are kind of slightly different, because I think that from a private sector point of view, there are enough jobs, and we struggle every day to find the right people for that job. And somehow, I see that our biggest challenge seems to be around getting people and opportunities together. So, the private sector, as you know, has to kind of bring about and showcase a business model which is bankable, which could attract, on its own merits, equity and debt from the market. So I don't think that, the government can do much on that side, right? Preparing a sustainable business model is the job of an entrepreneur. Putting it to work is also the job of an entrepreneur, and raising capital for it is also the job of an entrepreneur. Now, in the context of what we are talking today, if there could be a way to connect the private sector to the prospective candidates who are employable in a kind of nice and structured manner, I think that's the piece which we miss every day. For instance, I can tell you our example from the ground. We've tried to contact different departments, etc. So we find it extremely difficult to have like a single window where you could go post job opportunities that are available with the company and have structured replies come in. And this is more for jobs in the rural part of India. Okay. And it's also the focus of the government to, increase productivity in rural India, make sure that economically the villages become stronger, etc. So if there's one wish list, I would say that could Power for All be the facilitator for this dialogue, whereby companies like ours can, in a structured way, find access to the people who are looking for jobs.
Thank you so much, Rohit, for that. It's really interesting how you say that, it is as much as a role of the private sector to not just create the job, but also, bridge that gap. That's extremely fresh perspective. And thank you for sharing that. Abhishek, let me come to you. You have been a part of the entire report formation in India. You were there with us. You were one of the survey partners as well, executing the survey, as well as you were there in the last edition, the first edition that we did in 2019. Clean cooking is something that that creates a lot of jobs in India. But our Powering Jobs report not necessarily captures clean cooking. And there is a question by Dr. Praveen Dhameja from Skills Council for Green Jobs. And if I can ask you to respond to that, how cooking energy is an important area which should be included, as it provides a lot of employment and other benefits to rural women. And undoubtedly, a huge section of the green energy jobs that are created. So if you could share, what are the policy requirements in order to further strengthen that particular part of the sector, the cooking energy sector, and also, any response to that question. Over to you, Abhishek.
Thank you, Debanjana. So indeed, clean cooking is a pretty important area. And I think specifically if government can do something around that, is I see a twofold sort of intervention possible. Apart from, of course, the mainstreaming of LPG that the government has done in the last few years in the country to eradicate, so to say, traditional biomass. I think the two other things that MNRE in particular can look into is one, how do we enable more and more managed biogas interventions? Instead of giving biogas plants to individual households, we are actually supporting more and more entrepreneurship around biogas and let entrepreneurs provide biogas as a service in the areas where you have sufficient biomass available. So that then adds to the jobs and the entrepreneurship ambition of the country. The second thing with regards to clean cook stoves, again, a 35-year-long history that India has had with clean cook stoves. I think the science and the evidence is now pretty much out there that unless we are looking at tier 4 or tier 5 cook stoves from a emission abatement perspective, the health benefit doesn't come through. So, and the only primary way to enable those tier 4, tier 5 cook stoves to actually perform as well on the ground is to have standardized fuel, which means pelletized biomass along with the cook stove. Now that again can lead to a lot of jobs and local entrepreneurship opportunities if you end up installing village level, community level pelletizer units, which are able to process the locally available biomass into pellets, to then be used in these tier 4, tier 5 cook stoves. So particularly focusing on promoting tier 4, tier 5 cook stove manufacturing, as well as pelletization units and their business model deployment on the ground, I think can be twofold areas which would not only just address the gap in the clean cooking despite the LPG penetration, but also help further the jobs and the livelihood story and the entrepreneurship story that India has aims for. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. So before we close the panel, what we are going to do is go back to Dr. Saxena again. Sir, we have had a fantastic discussion where each of our panelists have laid out the opportunities and how we can all work together, the gaps and the existing mechanisms that are there in order to upskill and skill resources in both local, national and subnational level. So here's my, closing question to you, Dr. Saxena. How can DRE developers, CSOs, all of us join hands, say with Skills Green Council and take this forward? And what role could Skills Council play in bringing all of this under one umbrella? Dr. Saxena, you're on mute. Okay. Let me come back to Dr. Saxena on this particular question. But in the meanwhile, I would like to thank all our participants who have engaged with us through the entire last 2 hours, sharing such, questions, sharing questions that reflect on the report, as well as asking the pertinent questions. Thank you to the panelists who have been so much together and has shared such important values and insights on how both in India and Africa, skilling becomes an advocacy area in order to take forward from here in the Powering Jobs report. So this report, as you can see, that it's the first of a kind in a way that the report is just a building block of the advocacy that is about to come. And in our advocacy, we are expecting and banking on all of you to collaborate and take the recommendations forward, work for a policy environment which is more enabling for creating DRE jobs in India. And I hear, Dr. Saxena, you are online. So, sir, may I request you if you could share very quickly with us, the role that Skills Council can play in order to bring all these varied perspectives and information together and create, and what steps could be taken wherein the CSOs and DRE developers also could join hands in order to create, establish a well-defined training system in India for more DRE jobs, which absolutely is a potential in India. Okay, it seems I have lost Dr. Saxena, so no worries. We just have Okay, we have a message from his office that he is not there, but nonetheless, we'll take this question back to him and we are going to come back with the answer to this question because it's something that is a joint effort, something that all CSOs and DRE developers and companies need to come together. Once again, thank you so much for joining in. Thank you, participants, panelists, for being with us through an entire process. Steering committee members, our survey partners who have helped inform the report. I would also like to thank Christina, who has helped us deliver the message as well as clear guidance to the report. Thanks to Tony, our communications director, Suranjana, our global director for campaigns and partnerships, Carolina, our research director. We have also thank our global communications team, Matuba, Alessandra, who have been working behind the scenes and made this all seamless and possible. And of course, our India team, Ashwini and Sumana, who has been with us throughout and has been in touch with all of you for different things. Thank you, Anand, so much for sharing the report insights. And please, do not forget to follow us on social media. Our report is now online. And if you have any questions or queries, please feel free to get back to us personally, and we'll see that your questions are responded. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.